The babysitter's last text. Who's upstairs? The text came at 9:58 on a wet Friday in early November, the screen lighting the dim kitchen of a craftsman house on Maple Ridge Avenue in the town of Larkspur, Pennsylvania. The babysitter had written only 3 words, spaced as if she had to force her thumbs to move. Who's upstairs? Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from? And what time is it there? Her name was Ione Kestrel, a college sophomore who took evening jobs to pay for studio art supplies and a public transit pass to the city. She was a quiet soul with a quick wit, the kind of person who noticed the way rain made halos around streetlights and the way children's laughter changed when they grew tired. 2 kids slept under that roof that night, a 6-year-old boy named Briar and his 3-year-old sister named Lark. Their parents, Rowan and Maeve Harrow, had left at 7:15 for an anniversary dinner at a restaurant by the river. The year, if you need to understand the way phones hummed and doorbell cameras watched, was 2019. The house at 42 Maple Ridge was one of those old American stories, built in wood and memory, a deep porch with a swing that complained just enough to be charming, oak floors that spoke out loud when the humidity changed, crown molding thick as a picture frame. At the back, a narrow staircase rose from the mudroom to a short landing, and then up again into the second floor where the bedrooms sat in a row like well-behaved children. At the top of the main stairs, there was a crawl space door that had once led to a linen closet and now led to a barely insulated wedge of attic, hot in summer and sharp with cold in winter, the kind of door that makes a welcome thud when it closes and an unwelcome thud when it doesn't. Before the Harrows left, they did all the small, loving rituals. Maeve set out a plate of sliced apples, a bowl of popcorn, and a note that read, "Help yourself to anything except the scotch." Rowan pointed to the thermostat and said the heat pumps kick on if the temperature dips. Fancy house, but the bones are stubborn. He smiled at Ione in the doorway, hair damp from the drizzle, denim jacket dotted with rain. Text us if the storm knocks the power out. Text us if the kids wake and ask for the song about the lighthouse. Text us even if you think it'll make us look overprotective. It won't. At 7:30, the children were bathed, pajamaed, and nestled into beds that smelled faintly of line-dried sheets. Ione read the lighthouse song twice, and the little girl fell asleep with a hand on the brother's shoulder, a tether strong enough to hold a moon in place. At 8, the dishwasher hummed its modest lullaby. At 8:20, the rain came harder, dropping like a handful of pebbles thrown by a polite intruder. At 8:42, the doorbell camera pinged, announcing a raccoon with ambitions. Ione's phone ticked with messages from a group chat, small bursts of jokes and memes. She answered 2 and then set the phone face down, because she had promised herself she would be the kind of sitter who watched and listened. She put a kettle on. She chose a mug with a hairline crack because hairline cracks reminded her of river maps. She stood at the back window and watched the alley, where a single streetlight blew a cone of yellow onto the wet blacktop like a candle someone had forgotten to snuff. At 9:21, a floorboard spoke upstairs. It was not the sound of a child rolling over and not the polite pop of wood releasing humidity. It was a stepped-on sound, slow and weight-bearing, forward and then a tiny, deliberate back. Ione took one breath, then another. The kettle clicked off. The house returned to its normal choir. She checked the baby monitor screen. 2 small forms slept. The greenish night vision painting dreams onto their faces. She told herself she knew old houses. She told herself wind can make timber say things it doesn't mean. At 9:36, the sound came again, above the kitchen this time, in the hallway between the children's rooms. One step and another. A long pause. Then the faintest scrape, as if someone had scuffed a shoe and then, embarrassed by the sound, tried to rub it out with the sole. The kind of scrape that turns the air thin. Ione lifted the house phone from its cradle because old houses carry old phones like relics. No dial tone because this was 2019 and the landline was a costume. She put it back and picked up her cell. No missed call, no alert from the doorbell camera. She opened the parent's contact, hovered, did not press. First, she would look, she would be careful. She would not give Rowan and Maeve a reason to race home on wet roads unless there was a reason. She climbed the back stairs because they felt less like a stage. Each step was shallow and careful. The rain softened to a hiss. Her breath became a guest she had to host with manners. At the landing, the air grew cooler. She could see down the short hall into the little boy's room, the lighthouse nightlight casting a steerable arc of white. She could see the girl's room door nearly closed, just enough to make a crescent, the way some children like it. She could also see the crawlspace door at the top of the main stairs. It was closed, latch turned. That mattered more than it should have. She waited. Sometimes the house wants to know if you have patience. Sometimes it will reward you with silence. Sometimes it will not. There was a third sound, not a footfall this time, but a breath. Not hers. Not a child's soft, open-mouth exhale, but the kind of breath that pauses at the end like it is tasting the air. It came from the darkness beyond the crawlspace door, except the door was shut. Ione felt the tiny hairs along her forearms confess themselves to fear. She stepped into the boy's room. He slept with his mouth open just a little, lower lip shiny. Good. She stepped to the girl's room. Little Lark had turned onto her stomach, stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. Good. When Ione moved back into the hall, her eyes caught something at the far end where the light thinned. A strand of damp hair lay across the floorboards, faint as a pencil mark, a single narrow ribbon that did not belong to either child. It glistened. She knelt without thinking and picked it up. Cold. Clean. Long enough to belong to someone grown. She stood up too quickly and steadied herself with a hand on the wall. Her palm pressed into a nail head that had been painted over and sanded down so smooth it felt like a coin. She thought the oddest thought then. If I press that nail in, will the crawlspace door open by itself? She smiled at herself because fear makes even introverts dramatic in their own skulls. She returned to the back stairs, slow and exact, and only when she reached the fourth step from the bottom did she glance at her phone. The time read 9:58. The text she sent herself, as if letting the words exist outside her head could make them smaller, was only 3 words. Who's upstairs? She meant to send it to Rowan. She meant to send it to Maeve. She meant the message as a half-joke with a serious underlayer. But the thumb that had learned to move fast learned the wrong dance. It went to her friend in the group chat, and by the time she realized, the message had already become a tiny flare in half a dozen pockets around town. Her friend replied with, "What are you doing?" and also joking, right? And also put them on speaker. Ione did not reply. She set the phone on the counter face up this time. She took the largest knife from the drawer and then immediately put it back because knives are not courage and courage is not noise. She chose instead a heavy flashlight from the mudroom shelf, the kind that doubles as a hammer. She clicked it on. The beam carved a clean white tunnel along the baseboards. She moved to the bottom of the main staircase now, because if fear wants you to circle, wisdom wants you to cross. The newel post was worn as a handshake. Family photographs climbed the wall. A wedding photograph near the bottom showed Rowan in a blue suit and Maeve in a dress with sleeves that looked like light. Higher up, a picture of Briar in a lion costume, nap-flattened mane, grinning with the sincerity only a 6-year-old can manage. Above that, near the top, a framed landscape. The glass reflected the flashlight beam like a lid. Halfway up, she paused. There was that breath again. Not a cough, not a snore. A breath like someone who had been holding still too long and had to remind their body to keep doing the automatic things. The sound came from beyond the last step, in the shadow to the left, where the crawlspace door Saturday. It was closed, latch turned. She aimed the beam at the brass. The metal showed a fog that had not been there a minute ago, condensation, from a mouth that had exhaled near it. She kept her own mouth shut because you cannot take breath back once it is out. The latch moved. It moved too gently to be gravity. It made the tiniest metal-on-metal sigh. Then it stilled, as if the person behind the door had realized they had announced themselves and decided to pretend nothing had happened at all. Ione's voice, when it came, was not loud. It was firm in the way a music teacher's voice is firm when she asks a child to stop tapping the desk with a pencil. I'm a babysitter. The police are on their way. If you are a neighbor who has made a mistake, this is your chance to leave without me seeing your face. If you are not a neighbor, this is your chance to decide to be one. Nothing moved. But the house did a small thing then. It clicked. A sound traveled through the baseboards from kitchen to parlor like a cricket chirp. The refrigerator compressor had kicked on. The world had not narrowed to only this door. She stepped higher. She brought the beam closer to the latch. She did not touch it. She watched a drop of moisture on the brass slide very slowly toward the handle and then stop, held by a force that did not want to be named. From the children's rooms, nothing. From outside, rain. From down the hall, a draft like someone had opened a mouth to speak and then decided not to. She took the phone, thumb shaking now not from drama, but from the body's strange understanding of scales. She typed 911 and the call went through on the first chime. The dispatcher answered with a first name and a county. Ione told that calm voice her name, the address, the fact of 2 sleeping children, the fact of a locked door with breath behind it that did not belong to the family. The voice said, "Officers are on the way." The voice said, "Stay on the line." The voice said, "Do not open the door." So she did not. She watched it the way you watch a stage when you know the performer is already in the wings. She told the dispatcher every small thing she saw. The latch is fogged. The brass is pitted near the screw head. The paint around the jamb is chipped the way it chips when someone tries to open a door with a butter knife. The dispatcher asked about the kids, and she told her about the lighthouse song because sometimes the answer to a safety question is a story that proves you are paying attention. It took 6 minutes for the first cruiser to roll into the alley, though those 6 minutes ran long like string you cannot find the end of. 2 officers climbed the porch steps, rang the bell softly out of habit, then tried the knob and announced themselves. Ione walked down the main stairs, not taking her eyes from the crawlspace door, unlatched the front door, and stepped back quickly so the officers could enter. Their names were Officer Tamsin Dupre and Officer Hal Moran. They were young enough to still wear the job like a coat borrowed from a bigger relative, and old enough to know when to keep their weapons holstered because children were sleeping. Ione pointed. The hall was framed now by their bodies and the yellow hallway light and the cleaner light of the flashlight. Officer Dupre nodded, raised a hand to let silence accumulate, and then approached the door with a slowness that reminded Ione of a conductor raising a baton before the first downbeat. Dupre put 2 fingers lightly on the latch and did not move it. She bent, eye to the thin seam between door and jamb. She inhaled. She did not exhale for a count of 3. Then she did, a controlled tide. She mouthed one word to Moran. There. Moran moved with that cop-slow speed that reads as kindness until it becomes a tackle. He positioned himself on the knob side. Dupre took the hinge side. They counted without sound. Moran turned the knob and pulled. The door did not open. Dupre drove her shoulder low into the panel, and the old wood decided to be new and gave with a crack that sounded like an ankle breaking far away. The space beyond was small, angled, cluttered, with things families save because they carry stories in them. A fan with no blade, a suitcase with travel stickers that meant Paris had existed once for someone in this house. 3 plastic bins of children's clothes marked in black marker, a broken chair that had not given up, and a person, folded into the angle between floor and pitch, knees under chin, face turned away from the light, hands empty and ready to lie about it. Dupre said, "Do not move." Moran said, "Show me your hands." The person did not show their hands. They lifted their left shoulder like someone about to stand in a narrow coffin, and then realized there was no way to both stand and not be seen. They kept their face turned. A smell came from the small hot space that was not attic smell. It was sweat and wool and rain and a cologne Ione could not name but would recognize for years in crowds and feel a short-lived lightening in her spine. The person finally shifted enough for the light to catch their cheekbone. Smooth, young, the jawline of someone who still believes they can sneak back to the version of themselves that did not make this choice. Dupree reached. The person flinched, then stilled. Moran took the wrists, quick. Plastic cuffs clicked, and Saturday. The person whispered one word so fast and so quiet, it sounded like a sound and not a word. Please. There are nights when a house rearranges what you know about it. There are nights when law and luck arrive at the same time and dress alike so you cannot tell who deserves the thank you. There are nights when children sleep through the loudest noises and wake to the softest ones. Breyer woke when Officer Dupre gently asked Ione if the boy had a favorite song she could sing while they stepped this stranger past his doorway and into a world that would be, for the stranger, smaller and heavier. Ione sang the lighthouse song, the boy rolled over, the girl sniffed twice, and then reclaimed her rabbit. The name given at the kitchen table later, with the cuffs off and the hands folded around a paper cup of tap water, was Corin Vale. He was 22, a barback at a music venue downtown, a part-time mover for a storage company on the edge of town, a person whose landlord had changed the lock that very afternoon because rent was late again, and who had wandered past the Harrow's house just after 9, watching rain stencil shadows on the porch. He said the front porch light was off, that the back alley light was the kind that made him nervous because it buzzed. He said he had once done a job in this very house, moving boxes after Maeve's mother passed, that he knew the crawlspace door did not always latch if you pushed too hard. He said all this in a way that sounded like memorized lines. Officer Moran left for a minute and returned with a small bag-tagged chain of custody. Inside, a multi-tool with a narrow flathead blade that would fit under a painted jam and lever it without much damage, a pair of cheap cotton gloves, damp, a folded postcard someone had intended to mail, featuring a lighthouse on the coast of Maine, and a note written in pencil that read, "We are well, love you, see you in December." The postcard had not been addressed yet. Corin looked at the lighthouse as if it had insulted him. "Why?" Officer Dupre asked. "Are you in a crawl space with a multi-tool?" Corin said he wanted to get out of the rain. He said he saw the back door wasn't fully latched. He said he knocked and no one answered. He said he stepped inside to be out of the weather. He said he heard children and then realized he had made a mistake and was trying to hide until he could unmake it. He said he had not gone near the bedrooms. He said he had not taken anything. He said most lies are just a breath away from the truth if you hold the breath long enough. The doorbell camera proved he had never rung. The back door, which Ione had locked after the raccoon, had not been forced, which meant the multi-tool had met the strike plate and learned a new way to talk. The thin condensation on the latch proved his face had been inches from the brass, as if he were listening through metal to weigh his chances. The damp hair on the hallway floor did not match Ione or the children. It matched Corin. The officers did not say poetry out loud, but sometimes evidence makes a poem whether or not you want it. Rowan and Maeve arrived at 10:28, windblown and wet, faces open with fear, and then with the specific relief parents make when they count the number of children and find the number unchanged. Maeve thanked Ione, then thanked Officer Dupre, then thanked the kettle for existing because it gave her hands something to do. Rowan walked to the base of the main stairs and looked up at the crawlspace door and put his hand on the newel post like a man greeting an old friend and apologized under his breath to the house for not knowing it needed him tonight. The rain slowed, the streetlight outside defined every leaf as if auditioning them for a brighter job. Corin Vale sat at the kitchen table and looked smaller and then larger and then smaller again, the way a person does when they realize they have chosen a story they cannot revise. He asked for a lawyer then, as was his right, and the night shifted into a new shape with paperwork and phone calls and the sound of zippers on evidence bags. Later, after the officers had gone and the house had been put back in order with all the rituals humans use to convince themselves the world is knowable, Rowan stood on the porch and stared at the street. A car hissed by, tires whispering on wet asphalt. Somewhere a train declared itself. He turned when Ione stepped onto the porch with 2 mugs of chamomile tea and the brittle, beautiful calm people make after the danger has taken its hands off their shoulders. He said thank you a dozen ways that did not use the word thank. She said, of course a dozen ways. That meant I am shaking on the inside, but I am still here. Maeve joined them, the porch light warming the edges of her hair, and the 3 of them stood in a small triangle like a warning sign no one else would read. When Maeve spoke, her voice had a new floor under it. We will change the locks. We will reinforce that door. We will move the postcard basket. We will install a sensor that turns on a light at the slightest motion. We will do the things that let us sleep. Ione nodded and did not say that sleep would come with its own sounds now. The sound of a breath behind a door. The sound of a latch fogging. The sound of a floorboard speaking the truth. There is a detail the police report will not mention, because police reports must make simple lines out of crooked nights. At 9:59, after sending the text to the wrong chat and before calling emergency services, Ione leaned her forehead against the cool plaster of the stairwell for the space of one heartbeat. She whispered something that was not quite a prayer and not quite a promise. Okay, if someone is up there, I will not be the person who opens the door and invites them in. I will be the person who names the danger out loud. Sometimes that is the whole difference. Not bravery that charges, but the steadiness that refuses to be tricked into being polite to danger. The next morning, the November sky tried on a bland blue and liked it. The town of Larkspur went back to the work of a Saturday. Kids in hoodies kicked at leaf piles. The bakery line wrapped twice around the counter. A woman in a gray coat standing by the river thought the water sounded like someone ripping silk very slowly and wondered who she would tell that to. Ione slept past noon and woke to a peanut butter text from Maeve, which read in that shaky grammar of gratitude, "Come by for dinner anytime. And also, I found your denim jacket on the porch swing. And also, there will be pie tonight if you want pie." She smiled and answered with too many thank yous and one yes to pie. She showered longer than she needed to, stood still in the water in a way that made time into a warm curtain, then dressed in gently clean clothes that smelled like detergent and a future. When she stepped outside, the air had that crisp, crisp edge. That means the first hard frost has already visited and left behind a postcard of itself on every windshield. Maple Ridge Avenue looked like an old movie taught to speak color. She walked past houses that had their curtains open a little wider than usual, past neighbors who held eye contact just a second longer, the way people do when the story has almost become a myth and they want to remind themselves it is still shaped like a person. On the Harrow's porch, there were new screws in the latch. The crawlspace door upstairs had a length of wood screwed diagonally across it like a stern eyebrow. A small motion sensor had been installed in the hall. It blinked a polite green and then went to sleep. The kids were in socks, sliding across the floor, laughing the laugh that children make the morning after a storm when the yard is new again. Rowan handed Ione a slice of apple pie on a paper plate and said again what he had said the night before, but with the daylight, making his voice warmer. You kept your head, you called, you stayed steady. That is the whole job sometimes. We will tell people that part when we tell them the story. Not who he was, not what he said, not the smell. We will tell them you named the danger and didn't let it decide your speed. The town told the story in its own ways. The newspaper, which had been saved from extinction by a stubborn editor named Lita Quinn, wrote a piece with the careful headline, "Babysitter's Quick Thinking Leads to Arrest in Overnight Burglary Attempt." The group chat learned, gently from Ione herself, that sometimes jokes congeal into myths, and myths can be mean. At the music venue, a bartender wiped the length of the bar 3 times, then once more, then stopped. At the storage company, a supervisor stared at a stack of moving blankets and tried to add up what the numbers meant about people. There is not a moral here, sharp and so clean it can cut bread. There is not an ending where everyone claps and the house resumes being only a house. There remains a door with a new diagonal board and screws that will loosen over time and be tightened again. There remains a boy who will ask, on a night 2 weeks later when rain drums the gutter, "Can you sing the lighthouse song one more time?" And a girl who will say, not the part where the foghorn sounds, that part sounds like a giant in the crawlspace. There remains a young man named Corin, whose first court date will arrive with a sky the exact color of the alley light, and who will have to decide whether to say the word sorry to the ceiling or to the faces in the room. At 9:58 on some future night, a phone will light in some other kitchen in some other town, and a person will type 3 words spaced out as if their thumbs had to be convinced. Who's upstairs? If you are that person, hear this story as a map of breath. Name the danger, make the call, keep your voice exactly as loud as it needs to be and no louder. Stand where you can see doors and hallways. Carry light. Remember that a latch that fogs is a sentence the house is trying to say. Let the sentence finish. If you are listening from a city, may the traffic outside be ordinary and honest. If you are listening from a farmhouse that knows every creek by its first name, May the wind be the only guest tonight. If you are listening in a small apartment where the neighbor's footsteps already live in your ceiling, may you learn the grammar of each tread so well that the first strange syllable tells you exactly what to do. The babysitter's last text was a question pointed upstairs, but the real end of the story is how she answered all the other questions pointed at her. Will you panic? Will you try to be polite when the moment calls for clear? Will you open a door because silence asked sweetly? She chose no, no, and no. She chose the shape of a steady voice on a thin line. She chose to be the reason the house could go back to being only wood and memory. Some nights, when she passes the Harrows by chance and the porch swing is still, she hears only the rain and the river, and that is enough. Some nights, she hears the old door upstairs settle as the heat kicks on and thinks, with a small smile, that even a house can be taught to breathe more quietly. And on the better nights, every window along Maple Ridge holds a square of light cut, perfect as a fresh slice of pie, and the street keeps its watch, and the children sleep so deep the world could rewrite its rules, and they would wake to the new rules fresh and ready to be memorized. If that happens where you are, tell me when. Tell me what the air smells like. Tell me the hour, spoken slowly so the world cannot run away with it. Tell me if the latch on your upstairs door is dry and dull or a little fogged from someone's breath. Tell me if you are holding a mug with a hairline crack that looks like a river map. Tell me if the house has taught you any of its words. And if your phone lights at 9:58 and the message reads as simple and terrible as a knock, remember the kitchen in Larkspur and the steady girl in the denim jacket, and say out loud to no one and to everyone, not tonight, not on my watch, not in this house. The 911 call that kept connecting after the funeral. They buried the phone with him because his mother asked them to. It had been his tool and his diary, the way people keep their whole lives in their pocket now. And in the week between the collision and the service, she said quietly at the kitchen table that she wanted him to have it. The funeral was on a brisk Thursday in late March in a small town along the Skagit River in Washington state, the kind of day that smells like thawed earth and rain on cedar. 2 days later, at 2:18 in the morning, the county's emergency line lit up with his number and the call connected as cleanly as if he were standing outside the dispatch center with a brand new signal. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Keely March was the dispatcher on the board that night. 36. A decade of night shifts wrapped around her bones like a habit she didn't try to quit. She knew the sound of every ringtone the county used, and 3 it no longer trusted. She had trained herself to keep breath even if a voice said there is a gun, or the faraway way people say, I think I'm dying. She kept a knitted cardigan on the back of her chair and 2 photos on the shelf above the console. Her mother standing in front of Diablo Lake with her hair trying to fly away, and a Polaroid of a skinny boy with a chipped front tooth and a smile that looked like a dare. The boy was her younger brother, Finn, 28 in the photo, forever 28 by the time the town paper ran his name above the fold. The collision had been a week before spring turned a corner. Late at a 4-way stop out by the county line, an empty log truck rolling too fast through a fog that made taillights smear into red ribbons. Finn drove a dented Civic with a cracked dashboard and an air freshener shaped like a salmon that had long since given up its scent. He worked night stocking feed at the co-op and mornings on his old guitar, composing pieces called things like Wet Pavement and The First Chanterelle. When the deputy knocked on Keely's door just after dawn that Friday, the word sister felt like a ladder that someone had kicked away. They buried him with the phone on a Tuesday afternoon because the ground needed a day after the last hard freeze. Keely held the thing in her palm before they closed the lid. Old, black, the screen spidered, and the case pocked with drops of white paint from the time they redid the kitchen. She turned it face down, as if giving it privacy inside that last small room, and she did not cry in that second. She saved the crying for the night in her car outside the Safeway lot when the radio played a song he used to send her links to, saying, "Listen to the way the kick drum makes the air behave." So when the board flashed with his number at 2:18 in the morning, when the screen read Finn March Mobile, When the console showed the tower on the hill by bird's view, grabbing his call like a father grabs a child's hand crossing a street, there was a half second where Keely didn't breathe at all. Then she did exactly what training says. She pressed the line open, put her voice in the place it knows, and said calmly, 911, what is your emergency? Silence, which is not always empty. The air bedded itself in her ear. She heard distance, a kind of wet rush the river makes when it is thinking about snowmelt. Under that, a click like someone setting a mug on tile. Her eyes went to the automatic location information and found nothing helpful. The software threw up a circle that could have been half the county. The handset beeped as if someone on the other end had put a thumb over the microphone and removed it. Then a sound arrived that she did not mistake, a short, soft, breathy laugh. The exact one a brother makes when he cannot help but find something funny, even in a room where the air belongs to grief. Keely's free hand had already found the little rosary of buttons around enter that she wore down with steady use. Her thumb wanted the panic of someone else. She kept it from that. She tried again. Can you talk to me? If you can't talk, tap once for yes, twice for no. If you are hurt, I need you to stay on the line. We are here with you. A small sound like wind through fur limbs rode the connection, then static, thin as a hair. The call timer hit 19 seconds, 21, 27. She probed the network with a key command. The number at the top of the screen did not lie, it was his. She sent a ping. The triangle on her map twitched half an inch and then flattened, embarrassed to have moved. The night supervisor, a stout woman named MrBall, who kept cough drops in a coffee mug painted with trout, wheeled her chair closer without rolling over Keely's headset cord. You good. It's his, Keely said, and felt foolish because the board already told them both. She tapped a line into the event note. Caller number displays as deceased subject. Open line, faint audio, possible misdeal from unknown handset, possible pocket dial from transferred number. Because the systems need this kind of vocabulary, even when the body wants to type a prayer. The line stayed. The river sound rose and fell with the patience of a thing that had been working since the first melt in these hills. Twice the click. At 42 seconds, a voice so faint that her headphones might have invented it if she hadn't known the exact way it shaped vowels. A whisper before the word, the way he did when he wanted to speak quietly but his breath didn't know the trick yet. Key, he said. Then static erased whatever came next. She did what you do. You keep the line alive and you start the search without pretending you can command the search's heart. She thumbed a hot button that rang the on-call deputy cruising past Lyman. She opened the text box to the Fire District volunteers and wrote a plain message. Open line 911 from cell belonging to Finn March. Please stage at South Skagit Highway and mile marker 12. Listen for any audible cues. She sent it. She kept her voice in that pocket where calm is a bridge other people can cross. If you can hear me, Finn, give me anything, tap, breath, song, whatever you want. I'm here. I've got you. At 1 minute and 9 seconds, the line disconnected itself with the flat little goodbye that handsets make when they are tired of holding grief. MrBall squeezed Keely's shoulder. Not hard, just where the muscle under the blade flinches when you ask it to admit it's a muscle. Phones glitch, she said. The way you say a thing because you care about the person you are saying it to, not because the sentence is enough. It might be a number that got reassigned too fast. Or a voicemail we don't understand, or the system hiccuping. Eat your granola bar, drink your water. Keely nodded. She typed. She called the carrier and reached a support tech whose voice was young and far away and trying very hard to be the right kind of helpful. He put her on hold while he consulted screens and a script. He came back with words that felt like pebbles. The phone was deactivated the day after the funeral. The SIM wasn't live. The number was in a 30-day limbo before being returned to the pool. No activity on the account, no pings, no nothings. He suggested, gently, that older consoles misreport. She thanked him with the flat politeness you give a person who has done their job thoroughly and still left you in the same room. At 3:31, the line lit again. Same number, same tower, same ring that used to show up when he called from outside the co-op in the rain. She connected. This time, the wind sound was larger, the way a body learns to be a room for weather. She said his name. She said her name, because sometimes that helps even with the living. The whisper arrived again, under a breath that made her think of the cold. Key, he said. Key. What key? Love. Tell me where you are. She could hear Maribel pinging the deputy, already turning him around toward the bridge at Minkler. She messaged the volunteer fire chief, a man named Boone with a mustache that looked like the map of a meandering creek, and he replied with a thumbs up and the single word rolling, because that is how nights with radios and riverbanks work. The whisper came a third time. Key, box. Then the line shook itself off like a dog and was gone. At dawn, she drove home the long way, because the short way had too many pieces of memory stuck to it. She slept hard for 90 minutes and woke with the imprint of her headset still on her left ear. She showered and went to her mother's, sat at the table with the fruit bowl and the envelope full of sympathy cards that needed more than thanks in reply. She kept the thing she needed to say in her teeth while her mother talked about potato salad and what to do with the clothes in his room. Then she let it out. Simple. His number called, last night, twice. I answered. Her mother's hand did that small pat-pat that says, I hear the pain, but I do not believe the sentence. It's grief, she whispered. It changes the way machines sound. Keely nodded, because there was nothing else to do with that sentence but nod back and put it in a pocket for later. That night, Keely traded shifts so she could be back on at midnight, the board under her hands like a piano that belonged to the county. At 2:16, she said quietly to the room with no one in it but her, don't. And at 2:18, the line lit anyway. The event timer clicked into its 1 to 2 rhythm. She opened the call. The whisper came faster. Key, box, tread. She wrote the words down in block letters out of a reflex that felt like morality. She pushed her chair back an inch. Tread, she said, like stairs, like a step. A new sound crept in around the edge of the river. A hollow drum, regular, light. Keely closed her eyes. She knew that sound. Years of middle-of-the-night responses to houses with basements and water where it didn't belong. Sump pump, she said out loud, not to the caller, not to the room, just to the fact of sound. She typed, sump, pump, hum. Then another word arrived under the hum, not from the line, but from inside her own head, wearing the voice of the skinny boy in the Polaroid. Take the old key from the coffee can, sis, the one with the brass coin stuck to it. Box under the stair, third tread up, like we did when the lights went out in storms. She stood before she meant to. Maribel watched her, didn't stop her. Keely put the call on a hold that wasn't a hold, and told Boone to swing a truck by her mother's house. She called her mother from the desk that sees everything. Don't be afraid, she said. I'm sending the volunteers to check the basement. Just wait for them. Don't go down alone. Her mother didn't ask why, which is one thing grief teaches. People you love get to make requests without explanation for a while. Boone's rig rolled up with its lights quiet. The volunteers went headfirst into that smell. Every Northwest basement owns bleach and wet, and the memory of potatoes stored during years when the family didn't trust the store. Keely stayed on the line with the open nothing, her voice splinted into calm by a profession that forbids hysteria. The pump clicked. The whisper breathed once more and said a word she wasn't ready for. Sorry. Then, softly, don't be mad. Boone's voice arrived on the radio like a chair scraping back. Found it, he said, under the third tread. You want me to read you the note, or you want me to bring it to you? Read, she said, because whatever was going to happen to her lungs if she waited wasn't worth the poetry of paper in hand. Boone read slow, the way you read a recipe from a grandmother's hand. It's written on the back of a co-op receipt. It says, key tape to this in case. Safe deposit at Skagit State. There's a note inside for Key. Don't tell Mom what bank it is because she'll go without you. Tell her to wait. Also, okay, sorry about the dent in your bumper. That last part's got a smile face drawn like a potato. Something in Keely that had been standing on one leg for a week put its foot down. She let out a laugh that wasn't a laugh and wasn't anything else her mother would have recognized over the old landline if she'd been listening. She wrote the words down because the act made them legally alive. The line in her ear hissed a little, as if pleased. Then it went quiet. Morning brought a restless sun and the sort of legal tasks people think the dead should have trained us for. She drove her mother to the bank with the safe deposit vault and the ancient pen on a chain. She presented the letter that the funeral director had told her to keep in her purse. They signed a paper. They went into the room with the little booths. The banker slid the box out and put it down like a ceremony. Inside was a small green notebook with his handwriting, which had always leaned like a boy sitting cross-legged on a sidewalk. For Keely, it said on the first page. Next to it, a business envelope with her mother's name. There was a key on a ring shaped like a mountain that belonged to the old Subaru they used to share, and a folded paper that turned out to be a draft of a song he would never record because the bridge wouldn't come no matter how he tricked it. There was also a receipt for a storage unit in town that she'd asked him about once, and he'd shrugged and said tools while his eyes looked at a point behind her shoulder. He had written her a letter that began with two jokes whose laughter had expired, and then got to the part that made her lever open a whole new drawer in herself. "I know you'll be the one who makes sense of this stuff if anything happens," he wrote. "I know I'm not supposed to say if anything happens like I can see it, but I think about it when I'm out by mile 12 in fog and the log trucks don't think they need me to exist." He told her where to find things and how to say certain facts to their mother in a sequence that would hurt less. He wrote a sentence that came from the middle of his lungs. "Don't carry what isn't yours." He signed his name so fast, the last letter looked like a dog's tail. She held the little book while her mother read her envelope. Her mother's face did a new thing, an arrangement Keely hadn't known it could do. She realized, not for the first time, that grief makes a gallery of your expressions, and you have to decide which ones are worth hanging. That night, Keely took herself off the schedule, even though the county hates it when you do that with no notice. She made tea the way their grandmother did, steeped until the spoon stood up if you let it. She sat at the kitchen table with Finn's notebook and a pencil for the words she needed to lay next to his. She wrote the dates like you have to say them out loud, late March, 2021, because numbers felt like bad company. She made a list because doing is a language the body trusts. At 2:18, the phone on the wall rang, the old landline they had kept for storms because cell service sulks here when the rain gets personal. She lifted it with the same hand she used to place IVs when she thought she'd be a nurse. She said hello the way you say hello into a hotel room when you think someone might be in the shower, polite and ready to apologize. "Open line," said the part of her that had trained for too long to rest, but it wasn't the emergency board. It was her mother's cousin from Bellingham, voice carrying prayer under its vowels. Keely felt the absurd laugh again and let it go this time. Not tonight, she thought to the air where a river sometimes lived. The calls went quiet for 3 nights after that. She dreamed the sump pump clonked in a steady heartbeat and that the water rose anyway, inching up the metal pole of the washer like it had a plan. She woke with her mouth dry and her eyes open, the way a serviceable person wakes when she has decided she will not let the day surprise her anymore. On the 4th night, the board lit at 1:10, not 2:18. Same number, same tower, same little pang like someone pulling 3 hairs from the back of her neck in the exact way a brother does when he wants you to feel a thing without associating the pain with him. She answered, now less afraid of the fact and more afraid of the day when the board would decide to stop being strange. This time, it wasn't the river. This time, a sound like tires on aggregate eased into her ear. She heard a blinker make an unnecessary music. She heard a rumble her body recognized as the mile-long freight that climbs the grade toward concrete and can be heard everywhere when clouds lay a lid over the valley. She said his name. The whisper didn't come. Instead, a voice she didn't know. Exhausted in that way dispatchers measure, with a ruler, not with pity. "Ma'am," the voice said, "are you the lady on the other end of this number? This thing called me and it went straight to your board." Keely did a fast thing with her hands that told the recorder to make a second copy. She said her name and her role. The man explained in the way tired men always do, with extra details they do not know are extra. He was a rail worker out past Birdsview, night shift, walking the line with a vest and a can of paint, and a patience that came from a man who had watched 3 friends leave town for no good reason. A phone lying by the ballast, lit up bright white as a trout belly, and slid a call to 911 before he could decide how to feel. He picked it up because of course he did. He saw the screen read Finn March because whoever the system was had a sense of humor. "Where exactly are you, sir?" she asked, and he told her the truth the way only people at 2 in the morning tell you truths. Mile marker 11, point something, run outside of the line, by the old alder that looks like a witch if you give her a hat. She sent Boone with 2 men and headlamps and the desire to leave without needing to talk to anyone. They found the phone in a seam of gravel, half covered by ash from last summer's burn, no SIM, no battery, a thing not alive, and still somehow doing the work a thing does when asked correctly. The railman said he had watched a marten cross the tracks with the authority of a bishop, and that the phone had lit at his feet with no reason. Boone brought it back in an evidence bag, as if that would matter to anyone who keeps a room of labeled bags. Keely set the dead phone on the console like a votive. She stared at it 4 minutes and 40 seconds, and then turned it face down the way she had in the chapel with the roses and the smell of lilies that always go too far. She spoke into the radio to tell the volunteers to go home. She put a note in the event record that read in plain human, "Found object belonging to decedent, recovered at tracks near mile 11, turned over to family." The calls didn't stop. They thinned. They arrived on days when the river wore fog like a borrowed coat. They brought her directions she did not always want. It called once when she and her mother were at the storage unit with the overhead door that rolled like a prayer. "Box on the right," said the whisper after the open line, and the pump hum and the small laugh had passed. Not the one with Christmas lights, other right. The box held the watch their grandfather had worn in the war, and 2 rolls of quarters, and the letter that finished a fight their mother had been carrying with a girl from high school for 30 years without admitting it was heavy. It called once more on an evening in late July, the kind of hot, rare to that valley, when heat lies down like a dog everywhere and pants. She was off duty for once, drinking water in long draws with a slice of lime she did not deserve. The board would be in someone else's ear. Still, she felt it. The old wall phone rang. She lifted it. Nothing. Then the faintest corridor of sound, the way a tin can telephone sounds when the string is too long. She stood very still in her kitchen, in a house that still carries their father's shadow even after 2 decades, and she listened. No river, no pump. Someone whistled 3 notes she hadn't heard since they were kids on a porch with a bowl of cherries and sticky hands. The notes meant, "Come in, it's time." Then the line went as tenderly empty as it had ever been. People ask her sometimes when they find out what happens on the night board, whether she believes in ghosts. She says no in the way a person says no to a question that tries to make a movie out of a documentary. She believes in the way the valley holds sound and the way water teaches machines new tricks. She believes in the habits of grief, which include calling you at unreasonable hours and asking you to find objects on shelves you didn't label. She believes in the way certain names carry weight in certain counties and in the way good men hide keys in obvious places because they want the right person to find them without feeling tricked. If you listen for a moral here, you will miss the point and the point will not be angry. It will go on being a point without you. Keely goes to work, she works. She keeps the cardigan on her chair and the photos on the shelf. She answers calls from people who are alive in the cracked ways the living are alive, and she sends help, and sometimes the help is in time, and sometimes it is in time to witness the end of something. She eats her granola bar. She drinks her water. She drives home the long way if the short way tells a story too loudly. She keeps the dead phone in a drawer that sticks a little on humid days. She tells the story to exactly the right number of people and then stops. Some nights the board does the old trick and shows a number the carrier cannot account for, and a tower that should be asleep, and a location shaped like a shrug. She answers. She says the words she has said more than any words she will ever say. 911. What is your emergency? If all that comes back is a river being a river, she lets the line stay until it learns how to disconnect. If a whisper says key or box or sorry, she says the truth in the voice that has led more people back to themselves than the county will ever know. I've got you. We'll figure it out. When she passes the graveyard on her way to the early shift now and then, she rolls the window down and checks whether the air smells like cut grass and stone or like lilies someone should have watered more recently. She does not say his name out loud there because she knows better. She says it in the car when the freight rolls through the valley and makes the whole county feel like a chest resonating under a singer's hand. She says it in the basement when the pump kicks on and the house remembers last winter. She says it when her mother takes a nap in a chair with sunlight that has fallen asleep with her. And sometimes, when the hills fold the night just right and the board glows a color she cannot forget, the call connects after midnight and after the end of a song and after the last note of a life that learned to close drawers. It connects after the funeral and after the casseroles and after the number has technically stopped being anyone's. The call connects, and a river breathes, and a laugh leans into the wire, and a word that matters knows the way to the one person who will stand still long enough to hear it and then do something small and exact with what she has heard. That is enough. That is all anyone should demand from a story that features a phone and a county and a woman who is good at being awake when most of the world is asleep and at letting go when it is time to let the line go. So, if your phone rings with a number you are certain belongs to someone who has been given over to the ground, do not panic, do not make a shrine, do not go on television. Answer, stand still. Say your name, ask for what it wants. If the only answer is a sound you know, river, pump, train, the kitchen clock arguing with the refrigerator, write down the words anyway. They will lead you to a key you were meant to find, a box you were meant to open, a third tread meant to lift. And when the line empties itself politely, as lines do, put the phone back on its hook and walk the long way to bed. Somewhere far off, a dispatcher you will never meet is saying the same sentence you just said, in the tone that holds a county steady. I've got you. We will figure it out. Then, a light goes dark. The river keeps the beat, the valley sleeps, and doesn't, and goes on. The babysitter heard a voice, don't answer the door. The first knock came at 8:53 on a rain-polished Saturday in late October, the kind of night in Portland, Oregon, when sidewalks shine and porches feel closer to the river. The house on Birch Hollow Court sat half a block from a small park that still carried the day's damp laughter. Inside, the dishwasher murmured, and a kettle tried to be brave. The babysitter stood in the kitchen doorway, one hand on the frame, listening because something in the sound at the front of the house asked to be listened to. The knock was polite, then it wasn't. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Her name was Isola Marin, 19. Art student, commuter, weeknight sitter for families who liked the way she paid attention. She had a way of noticing and then not needing to say what she had noticed. 2 children slept upstairs in rooms that smelled like clean cotton and a little of crayons. Oren, 5, a collector of sticks, and Juniper, 3, a thumbsucker who dreamed with her hands still resting on the bed rail as if the world might roll. Their parents, Elowin and Cormac Pike, had left at 7:15 for a long-promised dinner with friends on the east side. The year was 2016, when doorbells had learned to film you and phones hummed even when you wished them quiet. Isola had arrived early because she liked the first hour best when the house met you and you met it. The Pike's place had bones from the 1930s and confidence from a do-it-yourself remodel. A deep porch with a swing, pine floors that told the truth when the humidity rose, a narrow staircase that gave out a soft warning at the third tread. The front door had a knob smooth with history and a deadbolt that made a good, finished sound. Someone had left a bowl of apples on the kitchen island and a note in Elowin's looping hand, help yourself to anything except the chocolate chips. The note had a smile drawn like a quick breeze. There was also a line at the bottom that felt like it had been added while standing up. If someone knocks and we're not back yet, don't answer. That line had made Isola breathe out through her nose, amused. Then the weather settled in and the streetlight outside made the rain look like it had purpose. And she read the line again without amusement and put it into the pocket in her mind where she kept instructions that were probably not overcautious. The first knock came, then the doorbell. The chime had been replaced during the remodel and sounded like an idea of a doorbell rather than a doorbell itself. Three notes, the middle one shy. Isola glanced at the hallway. The front camera should have sent her phone a picture, but her phone sat face down on the counter as an experiment in being a better person. She lifted it. No alert. No snapshot of a porch visitor wet with evening. She opened the app anyway. The screen showed a frozen image from 2 hours ago when the delivery driver in a yellow slicker had left a cardboard box and made a joke to the camera about swimming away. She touched the screen to wake it. It refused. The second knock came, not loud, but certain. She heard a hush behind the sound, no traffic for that moment, no neighbor's laugh, the rain taking a breath. "Coming!" she called, and heard the word bounce off the door and regret its volume. She crossed the living room, passing the lamp with the heavy base and the stack of picture books Elwyn had left, lined up for bedtime like a plan that had already succeeded. She stopped 3 steps from the door, where you can still see the whole threshold and also the 3 framed photos on the wall to the right: Pike family on the Oregon coast, Pike family at a pumpkin patch, Pike family on a couch in this very room, elbows touching. The peephole showed dark. Not the dark of a coat, too close. The dark of rain pressuring the lens. She tilted her head to the side window, the one with the glass etched in a pattern of leaves. A shape stood on the porch, too close to see contours. Tall enough to be adult. Still, she thought of families who send a neighbor to drop off a sweater, of packages misdelivered, of jokes. She reached up, fingers on the deadbolt, and then the voice came from the stairwell behind her, even and close, a whisper and not a whisper, a way of speaking that used the room more than it used the air. "Don't answer the door." Isola stopped moving. The words had come from the landing, or the old heating vent in the hall, or the part of a house where stair and wall meet and decide to be patient. She turned her head, slow, like a deer deciding whether the sound belongs to a creak or to a person who has forgotten how feet work. No one stood there. Only the line of light from the kitchen, a run of framed children's drawings on the stair wall, and the slight turn of the banister at the top where a hand likes to pause. "Hello," she said, not loud, not questioning, simply acknowledging the world's habit of speaking up when you have one hand on a lock. Down the hall, the nightlight in Oren's room painted a small boat shape on the floor. She took her hand off the deadbolt. On the porch, the shape shifted its weight. The doorbell chimed again, 3 notes, the middle one shy. Isola's phone remained stubbornly uninterested. She felt her scalp fizz, as if the body were sprinkling sugar there. She stepped back 1 foot, then another, until the space between her and the door felt like a sentence with the right number of commas. She set the phone on the entry table and kept her eyes on the door. The shape did not knock again. "Can I help you?" she called, calm. "The owners aren't home." The shape made no answer. The rain decided to be louder for a few seconds, then took its apology and softened. A car passed at the end of the block, and its tires whispered on wet asphalt, then left them again. The shape did not say, "Leave this," or "I'm lost," or "Wrong address." It did not step down the stairs or shift toward the window to try a too close look. It stood. The voice from the stairs came again, almost the same, the almost important. "Don't answer ISO." No one called her ISO except 2 people who were not in this house. Not even Elwyn, who preferred full names like a teacher who still missed a chalkboard. The nickname arrived and held. The quiet around it learned how to be heavier. Isola is not the kind of person who does brave for style. She does careful as choreography. She picked up the heavy flashlight from the umbrella stand and felt the weight in her fingers like a vote. She walked backward into the living room, never turning her back to the door until the couch was behind her knees. Then she set the flashlight on its end on the coffee table, ready to throw its beam like a purposeful animal. She tapped the phone awake. Now the camera app sent an alert, but when she opened it, the image from the porch was empty but for rain. A rain curtain, the edge of the porch railing. No shape, no wet footprints on the mat when she zoomed, though that could be the grain of the old wood lying. The house held itself very still. Oren coughed once upstairs and rolled to a new dream. The dishwasher hit its dry cycle and made a small whir, as if about to tell a joke. Isola stood. She walked to the staircase and put her hand on the newel post, because sometimes wood is better than a person's breath. She stepped up the first 3 treads, the third giving its soft warning, and peered down the hall. Juniper's door was open, just enough for Night to move through. Oren's was open a little wider because he had insisted, recently, that he could hear better if the door learned to be brave, and no one had argued with the logic. "Thank you," she said to the landing. She felt ridiculous. She felt correct. The phone hummed. A text from Cormac, "Running late, dessert took forever. You good?" She typed, "Yes." All quiet. Then after a second, a person knocked. Didn't answer. "All good." He bubbled back a thumbs up and a "let me know if weird." She did not type the lines she could not yet shape. She put the phone in her back pocket and went to the kitchen kettle. Tea might give the house another language to speak in. At 9:11, the sound came again. Not the knock. The dry slide of weight on porch boards, then a new voice, not in the room and not in the rain, a man's voice on the other side of the door, pitched to be reassuring and succeeding halfway. "Hey there," it called. "Sorry to bug you. My car slid a bit. I'm fine, just could I borrow a phone charger? Mine died." Isola stood very still on the tile by the stove. Charged phones. The sentence wore a coat of sense. It also wore the same coat a story uses when it wants to be invited inside. She felt the stare voice rest itself like a hand just between her shoulders. "Don't answer." "I can call a tow from here," she said. "If you tell me your name and plate, I'll call it in." A beat. The rain breathed. A neighbor's porch light clicked on 2 doors down, as if someone there had a similar feeling that night, should know it was being watched. "Sure," the voice said, cheerful, hurried. "Yeah, okay, appreciate it. I'm Kai. Plate is Washington, ZNJ." He trailed. The sound changed as if he had turned his head, as if reading something off a thing that had decided not to help him. "Hold up. Hard to see in the rain." "Okay," Isola said. She took a pen from the junk drawer. She did not step toward the door. The voice did not finish. The porch boards did the shift sound again, the one a body makes when deciding to step down, then silence, which is a choice. She waited a full minute and then padded back to the front hall, one foot making no more sound than the idea of a foot. Through the etched glass, she could see only the suggestion of a person-shaped absence where rain fell differently. The porch swing moved a breath back and forth, though she had not seen it move before tonight. She put her ear near the wood and did that thing you do against doors you don't mean to open. She listened to the hinge. She heard air. She did not hear breathing. She backed away because she did not owe the door any of the parts of her face. At 9:27, the voice from the stairs came a third time, and now it had a softness that made her throat ache. "Don't answer the door, Isola." "Okay," she said, and laughed once, not unkind. "Okay." She called the non-emergency line. The operator's voice was brisk, then kinder when she heard the children's ages. They sent a patrol car to cruise Birch Hollow Court. The officer rolled slow under the maples, touched 2 fingers to his brim up toward the windows like old practice, then slid away toward the park. He called to tell her he'd found no car in distress, no one walking in rain. She thanked him the way a person thanks another for being willing to be seen doing their job. At 10:09, something touched the back door. Not a knock, the whisper sound of a finger on glass. Isola turned off the kitchen light and let the room become a place where her eyes could do their best work. She stood behind the island and let one breath out, as if teaching her ribs a rule. The finger on glass again. Scrape, gentle. A child in some houses might do that, playing ambush. But the child would laugh or give himself away with breath fogging the pain in a haunted oval. The voice in the hall didn't speak. It didn't need to. Isola aimed the flashlight at the floorboards and thumbed it on. The beam carved a clean white lane across the tile and into the mudroom, up onto the window, where a skin of condensation wavered on the glass like a thought. No face waited beyond it, only the moon in its nearly new mood, and the reflection of her own shoulder shaping into something braver than she felt. The scrape came again. The flashlight beam caught the faintest arc at the level of a hand. She walked a half step closer and saw what had made it. On the outside of the glass, pressed lightly against the pane as if placed, and then hesitated and then not taken away, was a leaf. A maple leaf quilted with rain, stem hanging like a punctuation mark. It trembled and dragged and lifted free. That was all. By 10:45, the children were deep in the kind of sleep that makes a house feel like it has set down a heavy bag. Isola sat in the living room and read 3 pages of a book without hearing a word, then closed it and looked at the door again and felt foolish again for looking at a door. She texted Elowen, "No rush, all fine." Their reply came in a minute. "On our way, rain slow, be home around 11:15, and wore the sound of people who have begun putting coats on." At 11:19, as headlights turned the corner outside and rain slicked away from tires and the familiar shape of the Pikes' wagon slowed by the curb, the doorbell chimed a third time. 3 notes, the middle one shy. Isola stood in the hallway, hand on the deadbolt, and looked through the peephole. The porch was empty, the wagon door closed. Cormac ran up the steps in a coat wet enough to laugh at itself. He patted his pockets like a magician who had dropped something essential. He had not rung. The bell had decided to make a ceremony for him anyway. Elowen kissed Isola's cheek in the open doorway and apologized to the night for taking their time. Cormac did a father's walk down the hall to glance into his children's rooms, even though he had been told they were sleeping. Isola told them the short version. A knock, a voice asking for a charger, a patrol car that had been kind. The line on their note she had obeyed in a way that made the marrow in her wrist feel hot. Elowen's mouth went still. Not hard, still. She looked toward the stairs, like a person checking if water had been left running in an upstairs bathroom. "Thank you," she said. "I should have told you more about that line on the note. It felt like telling too much would make it silly, but I should have told you." "I heard a voice," Isola said, careful as she said it, ready to be believed, ready to be joked with. "From the landing. It told me not to answer. It knew my name." Elowen closed her eyes and nodded once. "Okay," she said. "Okay." They made tea. Cormac sat on the arm of a chair like a man who cannot bend himself small enough to fit back into an ordinary evening. Elowen told the story the way you tell one when you have lived with it long enough to know where its corners are. 2 winters before, she said, on a night when the river lifted itself and tried on a deeper voice, a man had walked the neighborhood knocking on doors asking for help. When people opened, he asked to come in and make a call, and if they stepped aside, he would cross the threshold with a speed that felt like another person had told him to hurry. Police had found him at the park pavilion where he had been sleeping rough, talking to a friend only he could hear. He never hurt anyone, Elowen said, but the nights after that felt like a door with a hard-to-find key. 2 weeks later, Cormac said, picking up the part he needed to say, "We were here with a sitter, not you, a college kid named Pike, no relation, and something similar happened. Knock. Voice." He started toward the door, and Juniper, who was barely 2, sat up and said clear as a broadcast, "Don't answer, Daddy." She was barely speaking in sentences. She said it right. My mother's voice used to say it to me when I would go to the door for anybody. Something about the way Junie said it. It sounded like my mother and not like my daughter, and also like my daughter anyway. I didn't open the door. We watched through the side glass. There was nobody there. The bell chimed again. And then, Elowen added, last spring, when we were packing for a visit to my sister's, the doorbell chimed at 2:17 in the morning. Twice. Cormac checked. No one. Junie sat up and said it again. Don't answer the door. We changed the batteries in the chime. We changed the camera. We got smarter about being dumb. But the voice, it comes when it needs to. And she sleeps through it now. We hear it and we listen to it, and then we don't tell anyone because the world doesn't know what to do with a family in a sentence. They laughed softly, a release. The kettle sighed. Rain found a new tempo along the gutters. Isola told them about the man who had used the name Kai and about the way the shape had filled the porch and then been only rain when she asked questions. She said the nickname the voice had used for her and watched Elowen's face widen in a slow astonishment that contained no fear. It knows, Elowen said. It knows who it needs to keep. They did not turn the story into an advertisement for another religion, they put the house back in order. Isola took the extra bills Cormac offered only after he insisted 3 times. She put on her jacket, damp from fear she didn't call fear, and stepped out onto the porch with them. The porch looked like any porch. The swing creaked because swings are built to do that, at least a little. The streetlight watched their car for a second, then got bored. Elowen reached for Isola's hand and squeezed, once, like a benediction you don't have to keep. On the drive home, the wipers kept time for a song Isola wouldn't have recognized if it had been played for her on a better night. She went under the overpass, where a man with a shopping cart had built a small palace of pallets and hope. She went by the open all-night grocery, where the cashier sells soup to people whose apartments never learned to hold heat. She went by a block of houses where the windows showed families still awake and not sorry. At a red light, she lowered her window and let the rain reach all the way in and touch her cheek, and then she rolled it back up and laughed, because the world had not insisted on being only one thing. The voice didn't follow her. It stayed with the house that needed it. Weeks went by without another knock at an odd hour. Leaves went to ground, and then to bags, and then to wherever leaves go when they've done their first job. On a Thursday in early December, Isola sat for another family across town and saw, on the neighborhood chat, a thread begin. Did anyone hear a bell twice last night around 2? The comments were predictable, then less so. A woman 4 streets over wrote that her grandmother used to leave a ribbon on the inside doorknob to remind herself not to open for kindness in the exact hour when kindness is most dangerous. A man who taught band at the high school wrote that he lived alone and still heard a voice sometimes when he put his hand on the deadbolt, and it always sounded like a person who had spent the afternoon organizing drawers and would simply not have the mess of a poor decision. Near midnight, her phone hummed. A text from Elowen, a photo of Juniper asleep on the couch under a quilt, toes poking out like arguments. Under it, a simple line. When she was half asleep tonight, she said, "Tell Iso thanks. The thanks is from me too." That winter, the door stayed a door. Spring arrived with a rhythm it was proud of. The voice came twice, each time for Isola, once at the Pike House, and once oddly in a different house where the rule felt the same though the picture frames were new. Don't answer. Each time she didn't. Each time the world failed to end. Each time she thought of how many doors in this country stand between people who need help and people who will offer it, and people who mean harm and the harm they intend. She learned something small and, to her, permanent. Safety and kindness are not enemies. They are a ladder. You step to the next rung when it will hold, not before. In late summer, after her semester ended and before the new one began, she took a train to see family in Eastern Washington. In the dining car, a man waved her to the empty seat across from him, the way travelers do when their stories want company, and she accepted. He was older, but not old, wore a ball cap with the logo torn off, and had one of those faces that make you feel remembered. He asked what she did. She said art and children and listening. He nodded as if that were a single profession. He told her he had been a night manager at a motel once, decades back, and how sometimes the night tells you who to open the door for and who to speak to through glass, and how your body knows if you let it be the first expert. He said his mother's voice still visited clear, not spooky, not the kind of thing you put in a movie, and told him the one sentence that she had left him as a tool: don't answer the door, not because you aren't good, because you are. She returned to Portland with a sketchbook full of stairways and kettles and porch swings. She babysat for the Pikes the first Friday of October, a night with dry leaves and a moon that put on a mustache of cloud and then laughed at itself. The bedtimes went easy. The dishwasher hummed. At 9:14, the bell chimed once and stopped. She walked to the door and put her hand on the newel post and waited. The voice did not come this time. The house trusted her to have learned. She didn't answer. Later, when Elowen got home and leaned against the door while she took her boots off and said, "I love my boots and I love taking them off," Isola told her about the single chime. Elowen laughed softly and asked if she wanted pie, and they ate pie in the kitchen with their spoons, making small civilized noises, and the night minding its business. If you want a moral, there isn't one sharp and neat enough to slice bread. There is a sentence that belongs to a particular house on Birch Hollow Court, and maybe to your house too if you need it. Don't answer the door. It doesn't mean never. It doesn't mean be a city made of fear. It means listen for the moment your body tells you the story the night is trying to sell, then say no with enough steadiness that the night has to take its pitch elsewhere. If you are ever in a quiet house with children sleeping like small planets upstairs, and the door learns a new trick with its hinge at a time of night when even helpful people forget how to stand, and you hear a voice that knows your name and the shape of your life, let it be a chain on the inside, not a chain on the world. Make tea, call for help you trust, stay in the room with the light. Thank the air when it warns you, even if the thanks feels ridiculous in your mouth. Names will still be names in the morning, doors will still be doors. And you will have kept the lesson the old houses know. Sometimes the kindest act is to hold still while the night tries your latch and finds it true.